The gentle hum of the airplane's engines gave way to applause as we touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Paris. Just the name carried a melody of romance, like a promise whispered beneath the glow of a street lamp. As soon as we stepped into the terminal, everything felt like a dream, the soft chatter of French around us, the aroma of freshly baked croissants, and his hand, warm and steady, guiding me through the crowd. "Welcome to the city of love, Mrs. Bennet," Chris said with that boyish grin I fell in love with. His excitement was contagious, and I squeezed his hand. "I can't believe we're really here." Our hotel was tucked away on Rue Claire, one of those postcard-perfect streets where café tables spilled onto the cobblestones and flower stalls stood as if painted into the scene. Chris had splurged on a suite with a balcony overlooking the Eiffel Tower. That night, we toasted our first evening as husband and wife with champagne, the lights of the tower shimmering like gold dust in the distance. "This," I murmured, leaning into him, "is everything." He kissed my forehead. "Wait until tomorrow. I have the whole day planned." The next morning was crisp and bright, with the scent of spring in the air. We decided to start with a stroll to the Eiffel Tower. Chris held my hand as we walked, his phone out to check for nearby bistros for brunch. "I think there's a place with amazing crepes just around the corner," he said, scanning the map. "Let me check the reviews real quick." As I admired the intricacy of the iron lattice above us, a chime broke through the morning air. His phone. He glanced at the screen, and in that moment, the carefree gleam in his eyes faltered. His grip on my hand tightened. "What is it?" I asked, instinctively leaning closer. "Nothing, just a notification," he said too quickly, his thumb brushing over the screen. But the brief flicker of his reaction had already ignited a spark of unease in me. When he shifted his phone, I caught a glimpse of the message banner: "Miss you, can't wait to see you again." I froze. My breath hitched as a kaleidoscope of emotions twisted inside me. Surely, it had to be a misunderstanding. A wrong number? But Chris's expression told another story. He was trying too hard to act casual, scrolling as if the message didn't exist. "Chris," I said slowly, my voice steady despite the storm gathering in my chest. "Who was that?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't meet my eyes. "Just a work thing." My heart sank. "Work thing?" I repeated, the words hollow in my mouth. "On our honeymoon?" "It's nothing, sweetheart. Let's just enjoy the day." But the warmth of Paris felt a degree colder. The tower loomed above us, indifferent to the small fracture that had just appeared in the picture-perfect honeymoon I thought we were having. I didn't press Chris immediately. His explanation was thin, like tracing paper over a secret. But the sharp edge in his voice when he said, "Let's enjoy the day," warned me against pushing too hard. So, I let the moment slide, for now. We found a small bistro near the Seine, its tables draped in white cloths that fluttered with the breeze. Chris ordered for us, café au lait and pain au chocolat for me, a croque-monsieur and espresso for himself. Normally, I'd tease him about his bold caffeine choices, but I could barely taste the rich chocolate in my pastry. My mind was tethered to the text I'd seen. Chris kept the conversation light, pointing out nearby landmarks and recounting trivia about the Eiffel Tower's construction. But every time his phone buzzed, my stomach clenched. He flipped its screen down after the third chime. "Bad signal?" I asked, forcing a smile. "No," he said too quickly, then caught himself. "Just keeping it out of the way. You have my full attention." It sounded like a line, and not a particularly convincing one. My gut churned with questions I wasn't ready to ask. After brunch, we wandered toward the river. Tour boats skimmed the surface of the Seine, their passengers snapping photos of the grand bridges that connected one arrondissement to another. Chris suggested a ride, but I declined. The idea of sitting still while my thoughts raced felt unbearable. "Maybe later," I said. "Let's walk instead." The crowds along the riverbank were thick, yet I felt oddly alone. Chris held my hand as we wove through the throng, but his grip felt looser, more absent. Or maybe that was just my imagination, heightened by the cold doubt that had slipped into my mind. We reached a quiet corner of the Champ de Mars, where the Eiffel Tower framed a flawless view of the city skyline. Chris pulled out his phone, holding it up for a selfie. "Smile, Mrs. Bennet," he said, wrapping an arm around me. I smiled, at least, I think I did. The camera clicked, capturing what would surely look like the perfect moment. And yet, behind that image, the facade was beginning to crumble. "Let me take one of you," I offered, eager for a distraction. Chris handed me his phone, and my fingers trembled slightly as I gripped it. He stepped back, arranging himself against the iconic backdrop, his smile easy and carefree. But as I lifted the phone to snap the photo, the screen flickered to life. The message was still there. "Miss you, can't wait to see you again." This time, I saw the sender's name, Hannah. The air seemed to evaporate from my lungs. My thumb hovered over the message, itching to open it. I had seconds, maybe less, before Chris noticed. But could I really cross that line? Did I even want to see what lay on the other side? "Everything okay?" he called, breaking my trance. I forced a laugh. "Your screen's on," I said, locking the phone before handing it back. His eyes searched mine, cautious, but he said nothing. "Let's find some shade," I said, needing an excuse to escape the blistering weight of my own thoughts. Chris nodded, slipping his phone into his pocket. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of lavender from the gardens. I wished it could carry away my unease just as easily. The shade of a towering chestnut tree offered some respite from the midday sun, but it did little to soothe the storm brewing inside me. Chris was looking out at the tower, oblivious, or pretending to be. He always had a knack for deflecting discomfort, and I wondered if this time was any different. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the shimmering landmark. I nodded, the words stuck in my throat. "Do you want to climb it later? We could go all the way to the top." Climbing the Eiffel Tower had been on our itinerary from the start, but now, the thought felt oppressive, like scaling a monument to our unraveling marriage. "Maybe tomorrow," I said, avoiding his gaze. Chris hesitated, then smiled. "Tomorrow it is. What should we do next?" I wanted to shout at him. I wanted to grab his phone and shove it in his face, demanding to know who Hannah was and why she thought it was okay to text him things like that. But every time I opened my mouth, the words refused to come. How had we gotten here? It wasn't long ago that I felt like the luckiest woman alive to have him. He was charming, spontaneous, and quick to make me laugh. He'd swept me off my feet with a proposal that felt like a fairy tale, a candlelit rooftop dinner followed by a string quartet playing our song as he knelt on one knee. But now, standing beneath the very symbol of romance, I felt the weight of something ugly pressing down on me. "Let's walk a bit more," I said finally, hoping movement would keep my spiraling thoughts at bay. We strolled through the gardens in silence, the crunch of gravel beneath our feet the only sound between us. Couples lounged on picnic blankets, sharing bites of baguettes and sips of wine. Children chased each other through the trees, their laughter light and carefree. I envied them, wishing I could step back into a world that simple. Chris reached for my hand, and for a moment, I let him take it. His grip was warm, steady, and painfully familiar. "I'm glad we're here," he said, his voice soft. I stopped walking, turning to face him. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Who's Hannah?" The change in his expression was immediate, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by a practiced calm. "What?" he asked, his voice tight. "I saw her text," I said, my tone sharper now. "On your phone. She said she missed you." Chris let out a soft laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's not what you think, Emily." "Then what is it?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "She's a friend. From work." "A friend?" My voice cracked, and I hated how small I felt. Friends don't send texts like that. "Who is she, Chris? And don't lie to me." His gaze darted to the ground, and when he looked back up, there was something guarded in his expression. "She's someone I used to know," he said finally. "Before you. It's complicated. Complicated." The word hung between us like a guillotine, ready to fall. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Chris didn't answer right away. The silence was deafening, stretching into a void I wasn't sure we could climb out of. "Emily," he began, stepping closer. "This trip is about us. Can we not do this right now?" "No," I took a step back, my voice trembling. "You don't get to sweep this under the rug, not here, not now." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw the frustration simmering beneath his carefully controlled demeanor. "It's not what you think," he said again, but the words sounded hollow. I stared at him, searching for the man I thought I knew. The man who had promised me forever. But all I could see was a stranger. The walk back to the hotel felt endless, each step heavy with unspoken words. Chris walked a few paces ahead, his shoulders stiff, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I trailed behind, unable to bridge the distance between us. The streets of Paris, once so enchanting, felt suffocating now. When we reached our suite, Chris dropped his keys on the table and sank onto the edge of the bed. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. The silence stretched, taut and unforgiving, until I couldn't take it anymore. "Say something," I whispered, my voice breaking the stillness. He looked up at me, his expression weary. "What do you want me to say, Emily? That you're right? That I messed up? Fine. You're right." The admission was like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, anger and hurt surging in equal measure. "That's all you have to say? You're just going to throw that out there and expect me to, what? Move on?" Chris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't expect anything. I don't know what you want from me. I want the truth, Chris." My voice rose, echoing in the room. "Who is she? How long has this been going on?" He flinched, and for a moment, I thought he might shut down entirely. But then he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "She's someone I knew a long time ago. We reconnected a few months ago." My heart sank. "Months?" Chris nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It started out innocent, just catching up, talking about work, life. But," he trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. "But what?" I pressed, my throat tight. "It didn't stay innocent, did it?" He didn't answer, and his silence was all the confirmation I needed. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, the world tilting on its axis. "How could you?" My voice cracked, tears stinging my eyes. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Chris stood, his hands outstretched as if to calm me. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything. I didn't plan for this to happen. That's supposed to make me feel better?" I took a step back, shaking my head. "We just got married, Chris. We're supposed to be building a life together, not this." "I know." His voice was barely audible, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I know, Emily. And I'm sorry." "Sorry?" The word felt hollow, meaningless. "You're sorry? That's all you have to say?" "What else do you want me to say?" he snapped, frustration flaring in his tone. "That I hate myself for it? That I wish I could take it back? Because I do. I do, Emily." His words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. But they weren't enough. "Not this time." "I need some air," I said, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. "Emily, wait," Chris started, but I was already gone. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, the city lights blurring through my tears. I walked aimlessly, my mind racing, my heart aching. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? How had I missed the signs? Paris felt like a cruel joke now. The city of love had turned into the backdrop of my worst nightmare. The streets of Paris were alive with energy as I wandered, though none of it seemed to reach me. Laughter spilled from café terraces, and couples strolled hand in hand, their faces aglow with the kind of happiness I'd once thought I had. Now, it all felt like a mockery. I found myself on a quiet bridge over the Seine, the water below glinting with the reflections of the city's golden lights. The air was crisp, and the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby boulangerie hung faintly in the air. But even here, in the solitude, I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. I leaned against the railing, the cool metal grounding me as my thoughts churned. My mind played a cruel reel of memories, the way Chris had looked at me during our wedding vows, the promises we had whispered in the dark, the way he had kissed me under this very sky just last night. How could all of that have existed alongside this betrayal? The soft vibration of my phone in my pocket startled me. I pulled it out, half expecting a message from Chris. But it wasn't him. It was a text from my sister, Abby. "How's Paris? Dream honeymoon, right? Send me pics." The words twisted the knife in my chest. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. I typed back a quick response, "It's beautiful. I'll call you when we're back." And shoved the phone into my pocket. Lying to her felt wrong, but I couldn't handle the questions or the pity right now. The sound of footsteps approaching pulled me from my thoughts. A middle-aged woman with a red beret and a silk scarf tied elegantly around her neck slowed as she came closer. She gave me a warm, knowing smile. "Trouble?" she asked in accented English, her voice kind but probing. I hesitated, the instinct to keep my pain private warring with the sudden urge to unburden myself. "The latter one. My husband," I admitted, my voice cracking. I think he's cheating on me." The woman tilted her head, sympathy softening her features. "I see. And you are here, together, in Paris?" I nodded. "It's supposed to be our honeymoon." She sighed, leaning against the railing beside me. "Ah, Paris. The city of dreams, and sometimes, of truths." Her words settled into me like stones. "Truths," I repeated bitterly. "I wish I could unlearn this one." "Non," she said firmly, shaking her head. "The truth is painful, yes, but it is also a gift. It is better to know, to see clearly, than to live in shadows." I turned to her, surprised by her certainty. "You make it sound so simple." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It is not simple, Cher. But it is necessary." We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us as the river whispered below. When she finally straightened and adjusted her scarf, she placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Whatever you decide, remember this: you are stronger than you think. Paris will not decide your story. Only you can do that." Before I could respond, she was gone, her silhouette disappearing into the glow of the streetlights. Her words stayed with me as I made my way back to the hotel. When I reached our suite, the lights were off, and Chris was sprawled across the bed, asleep. His phone rested on the nightstand, the screen dark. I stood there for a long moment, watching him. He looked peaceful, almost innocent, and for a fleeting second, I wanted to believe that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the shadow of Hannah loomed too large to ignore. I barely slept that night. The room was dark, but my thoughts were blinding, a kaleidoscope of anger, confusion, and despair. Chris's steady breathing beside me felt like a taunt, as if he had no trouble finding peace after all that had unraveled. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. If I was going to find out the truth, I couldn't wait for Chris to confess, or spin half-truths into something palatable. I needed answers, even if they shattered the remnants of my heart. The opportunity came when Chris got up to shower. As soon as the water started running, I reached for his phone. My hands trembled as I entered the passcode, his birthday, simple and easy to remember. The screen unlocked, and for a moment, I froze. This felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but wasn't it justified? Wasn't I owed this truth? I navigated to his messages, scrolling past the familiar names of coworkers and friends until I found her, Hannah. Her name felt like a slap, plain and unremarkable, yet loaded with everything I feared. My finger hovered over the thread before I finally tapped it open. The messages stared back at me, one after another, a damning string of intimacy and betrayal. Hannah, can't stop thinking about last weekend. You always make me laugh so much. Chris, same. I miss you already. Hannah, only a few more weeks. I can't wait to see you again. Only a few more weeks? That meant they already had plans to meet. My stomach churned as I scrolled further. There were photos too, innocuous at first, a selfie of her with a coffee cup, another of her sitting on a park bench. But then, a photo of her on a bed, her hair tousled, her expression coy. I couldn't read anymore. My chest heaved as I locked the phone and set it down, my vision blurring with tears. The shower turned off, and I scrambled to the balcony, desperate for fresh air. The cool morning breeze hit my face, but it couldn't quell the storm inside me. When Chris emerged, towel slung around his waist, he looked startled to see me standing outside. "You're up early," he said, his voice tentative. I turned to face him, my heart hammering. "I saw the messages, Chris." His expression shifted from confusion to alarm, then settled into something resigned. "Emily." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't. Just don't. I saw everything. You lied to me." Chris exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. "I was going to tell you." "Really? When? After we got home? After you met her again?" My voice rose with each word, shaking with fury and heartbreak. His silence spoke louder than any excuse he could have offered. "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" Chris leaned against the doorframe, his face pale. "A little over 6 months." 6 months. The weight of those words hit me like a tidal wave. While we'd been planning our wedding, while we'd been making vows to spend our lives together, he'd been with her. I sank onto one of the balcony chairs, my legs no longer able to support me. "Why, Chris? Why would you do this to us?" He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice hollow. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's supposed to make it better? That you didn't mean to cheat on me?" Chris stepped closer, his expression pleading. "It didn't mean anything, Emily. I swear. I love you. I chose you." "Chose me?" The words felt like acid on my tongue. "You don't get to say that after everything you've done. You don't get to pretend like this is some accident you stumbled into." His face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine regret. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. "I need time," I said, standing. I can't look at you right now. Emily, please." "No," I cut him off, my voice firm despite the tears streaming down my face. "You made your choices, Chris. Now I need to figure out mine." I grabbed my bag and walked out of the room, ignoring his calls for me to stop. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, not with him, not with the weight of everything I'd just uncovered. The streets of Paris blurred as I walked, my pace brisk and aimless. My mind replayed Chris's words, his excuses, the pathetic attempt to downplay what he'd done. It was as if the world around me, once vibrant and full of promise, had dulled overnight. I found myself in a quiet park, far from the bustling crowds. The stillness was welcome, a contrast to the chaos inside me. I sank onto a weathered bench, staring at the clusters of daffodils swaying in the breeze. 6 months. That timeline kept circling in my head like a vulture. Chris had started seeing Hannah while we were booking venues, picking flowers, writing vows. All the while, he'd been leading a double life, smiling at me with the same lips that whispered sweet nothings to her. I dug my phone out of my bag and hovered over Abby's name. My sister had always been my rock, my sounding board. But as much as I wanted to pour everything out to her, I couldn't bring myself to hit call. Not yet. Instead, I texted, thinking of extending the trip by a day or two. We'll update soon. Love you. The lie sat heavy on my chest, but I wasn't ready to explain the truth. A soft voice broke through my thoughts. Pardon, mademoiselle, are you all right? I glanced up to see an older woman in a flowing skirt and cardigan, her gray hair swept into an elegant twist. She carried a basket of fresh flowers, her eyes kind and concerned. I forced a weak smile. I'm fine, thank you. She studied me for a moment, as if seeing through the lie. Then, she sat on the bench beside me. Forgive me, but you do not look fine. Sometimes, sharing your troubles can lighten the burden. I hesitated, but something about her calm presence loosened my guard. I don't know where to start, I admitted. The beginning is always a good place, she said gently. So, I told her. About Chris, about the text, about Hannah. My voice wavered as I spoke, but the words poured out, each one easing the pressure on my chest just a little. When I finished, the woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. You have suffered a great betrayal, mademoiselle. It is natural to feel lost. I swallowed hard. I just don't understand how he could do this. I thought I knew him. People are complex, she said. Sometimes, even they do not know themselves. But his choices are not your fault. I blinked at her, surprised by the clarity of her words. It feels like it is. Like maybe I wasn't enough. She shook her head firmly. No, Cher. Do not carry blame that is not yours to bear. His actions are a reflection of him, not of you. The words settled into me, a small balm against the ache. The woman stood, her basket shifting on her arm. Life has a way of testing us. But do not forget, Paris is not only a city of love. It is a city of strength. Let it remind you of your own. Before I could respond, she walked away, her figure blending into the park's dappled shadows. Her words lingered as I sat there, the weight in my chest shifting. She was right, this wasn't my fault. Chris had made his choices, and now I had to make mine. The question was, what did I want? The sun had shifted higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. I stood from the bench, the ache in my chest tempered by a glimmer of determination. The kind stranger's words echoed in my mind, Paris is a city of strength. I wasn't sure if I believed that yet, but I was willing to try. I returned to the hotel, my steps steady though my heart raced with anticipation. Chris was still there, sitting at the small table by the window, his hands cradling a coffee cup. He looked up when I entered, his face etched with worry. You came back, he said softly, standing as if he wasn't sure I wanted him to. I set my bag on the bed and crossed my arms. We need to talk, I said firmly. Chris nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Of course. Sit down. I shook my head. I'll stand. He swallowed hard, then set the cup down. Emily, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. His voice was earnest, but the sincerity only stung more. You never wanted to hurt me? I echoed. You were seeing her for 6 months, Chris. Half a year. Do you know how long that is? Long enough to know exactly what you were doing. He flinched, looking down. I didn't think it would get this far. That's the problem, isn't it? I said, my voice rising. You didn't think about me. Or us. You were too caught up in whatever it was with her to care about the consequences. I care, Emily, he said, his voice desperate. I care about you more than anything. Do you? I asked, the rawness in my tone cutting through the air. Because you had every opportunity to stop this. To be honest. But instead, you stood there in front of everyone we love and made promises you had no intention of keeping. I meant those promises, Chris said quickly. I still mean them. I let out a bitter laugh. You don't get to say that. Not after this. You've already broken them. He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched, but I backed away. Emily, please. Don't throw us away over one mistake. One mistake? I repeated, my voice sharp. You think this is just one mistake? It wasn't an accident, Chris. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose her. His hand dropped, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. What do you want me to say? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I love you, Emily. I don't want to lose you. I stared at him, the man I'd married, the man I thought I knew. His words sounded so hollow now, their weight lost in the shadow of his betrayal. I don't know if I can forgive this, I said finally, my voice trembling. I don't know if I even want to try. Chris looked like he'd been struck, but I didn't care. For once, I wasn't going to cushion the blow for him. I need time, I said, reaching for my bag. To figure out what I want, what I deserve. And I can't do that with you here. Emily, he began, but I shook my head. I'm going to stay somewhere else tonight, I said, my resolve hardening. You can have this room. I'll come back for my things in the morning. He didn't stop me as I walked out the door. The air outside felt sharper than before, cutting through my skin and waking up a clarity I hadn't felt in hours. Chris hadn't chased after me, and that, more than anything, solidified my decision. I needed space, real space, to think, to breathe, to remind myself who I was without him. I wandered through the streets until I found a small boutique hotel tucked away on a side street. The cozy lobby was a stark contrast to the grand opulence of the honeymoon suite Chris and I had shared. It felt right. I approached the desk, and a kind-eyed concierge greeted me. Bonsoir, mademoiselle. Welcome. Are you looking for a room tonight? Yes, I said. Just for the night. She nodded and clicked away at her computer before handing me a brass key. Room 304. Breakfast is served in the lounge at 7. Let us know if you need anything. Thank you, I said, managing a small smile. The room was modest but warm, with cream-colored walls and a small balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. I set my bag down on the bed and let out a shaky breath. The silence was deafening, but it was mine, unbroken by Chris's excuses or the weight of his betrayal. I opened my suitcase, pulling out my notebook and a pen. Writing had always been my solace, my way of making sense of things when my thoughts felt too tangled to untwist. I flipped to a blank page and began to write. What I deserve. I deserve honesty. I deserve loyalty. I deserve someone who sees me and chooses me every single day. The list felt small but profound, like the foundation I needed to rebuild myself. I stared at it for a long time, the words anchoring me as the hours ticked by. At some point, I drifted to the balcony. The night was cool, the air fragrant with the faint scent of jasmine. The city was quieter now, its rhythm slower, more contemplative. As I looked up at the stars, a thought struck me. Paris was still beautiful, still magical, even in the midst of my heartbreak. This trip didn't have to be defined by Chris's betrayal. It could be mine, too, a step toward reclaiming myself. The idea gave me courage. I pulled out my phone and booked a ticket for a river cruise the next day. It was something I'd always wanted to do, something I could experience for myself without needing anyone else. I went to bed that night with my decision firm. I wouldn't let Chris's actions dictate the rest of my trip, or my life. Morning sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, bathing the room in a golden glow. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, but they felt less suffocating now. I stretched, the ache in my chest dull but no longer unbearable. After a quick breakfast in the hotel lounge, I made my way to the riverbank where the cruise boat waited. The Seine shimmered under the clear sky, its gentle ripples reflecting the iconic bridges and historic architecture of Paris. I climbed aboard, choosing a seat near the railing for the best view. As the boat pulled away from the dock, a sense of liberation washed over me. The hum of the motor, the soft chatter of other passengers, the crisp breeze, all of it felt like a balm to my frayed nerves. As the city's landmarks drifted by, the Louvre, Notre Dame, and the towering spires of Saint-Chapelle, I let myself savor the moment. For the first time since arriving in Paris, I felt present, unburdened by the weight of Chris's betrayal. When I returned to the hotel, I found an email waiting in my inbox. It was from Chris. Subject: I'm sorry. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I wanted to read what he had to say. But curiosity won out. Emily. I don't know where to start. I've tried to explain, but I know words aren't enough. I hurt you, and there's no excuse for that. I love you, and I hate myself for ruining what we had. I don't deserve another chance, but if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you. Please come back. Let's talk. Let's fix this, asterisk asterisk. I stared at the screen, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that he could be the man I thought I'd married. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger in the past 24 hours, knew that love wasn't enough without trust. I closed the laptop, leaving the email unanswered. That afternoon, I wandered through Montmartre, its winding streets and artistic spirit a welcome distraction. I visited the Sacré-Cœur, its white domes gleaming against the blue sky. Standing on the steps, I gazed out over the city, the skyline stretching endlessly before me. It was there, in that moment of quiet reflection, that I made my decision. When I returned to the hotel, I packed my bag and checked out. I walked back to the suite Chris and I had shared, the key heavy in my hand. When I stepped inside, Chris was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of hope and dread. I wasn't sure if you'd come back, he said. I came back for my things, I said evenly, my voice steady. Chris stood, his face falling. Emily, please. Don't do this. I deserve better, I said, each word firm and deliberate. I deserve someone who doesn't need to be reminded what loyalty means. He took a step closer, but I held up a hand. You made your choices, Chris. And now I'm making mine. This is over. The finality in my voice seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He didn't argue, didn't beg. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping. I gathered my things and walked out of the suite without looking back. That evening, I sat at a cafe on the left bank, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset paint the city in hues of pink and gold. For the first time since arriving in Paris, I felt like I could breathe. Paris hadn't turned out the way I'd imagined. But in its own way, it had given me something unexpected, a chance to rediscover myself. As the Eiffel Tower lit up in the distance, I smiled to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.